shore with bait, the most common way to fish is on an open sandy beach when there's a bit of surf running. That method does produce bass, and I like to fish that way in the autumn months when on the south coast of Cornwall there is more likely to be a decent surf running. However, in the summer months, when fishing during the day in relatively calm seas, I find I have more chance of catching bass when fishing from rocky outcrops where I can place my bait close to some very rocky, weedy ground. The rough ground offers shelter and holds far more food for the predatory fish than the clean ground, and therefore more chance that the fish will be in the vicinity looking for a meal, particularly when it is a relatively bright day. I set out to a rocky outcrop I started fishing over 30 years ago. The outcrop enables me to place my bait close to some very rocky, weedy ground. By fishing from the rocks, I'm able to stay at the mark as the tide floods in, whereas if I fish from the beach, I would be pushed away from the mark by the incoming tide. The video was shot over a couple of sessions. I'm just heading out to the mark along the coast path here. Now around the low water period, I can get out onto these rocks via the beach. But if I want to get back via the beach, I have a limited fishing time. And at the moment, although the tide's ebbing, it hasn't gone back far enough. So what I'm having to do is go over the cliff top here and down to the mark. And that also means that I can stay out there a bit longer than if I was accessing it from the beach. Now this of course is very much the way of shore fishing in Cornwall. We have these steep cliffs that rise up from the shoreline, and to access some of these marks is not easy. And I know of several marks where the local anglers have put tied ropes at the top of the path to help them clamber down the cliff because it's just a bit too steep for them to walk down. So fishing's not easy, and this is why kayak fishing is so much easier, because you can access these marks, and of course access marks that even from the shore it's impossible to get to. But that said, you can't always go out fishing on the kayak, and that's one reason why I would never give up shore fishing. Apart from the fact that I enjoy it, but it's also the fact that at least shore fishing, if it's a little bit lumpy, a little bit blowy, I can at least go on the beach or off the harbour wall or to marks like this, although I wouldn't go off the rocks if it was too rough. So I'm going to go over the cliff top here and get down to the mark, and when I get down to the mark, I'll have a talk about the mark in a bit more detail. Okay, I'm here, and apart from negotiating this last little bit here to get down to the rocks, I'm at my mark. Now the tide's in at the moment, so you can't really see, but we'll see a little bit later when it gets down to low water. But basically, all of this area we're looking at now is very, very rocky and very, very weedy. And the idea is that I will fish just beyond the rock. There's a dividing line. I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but there's a dark area there which is the rocks, and then just beyond that we've got clean sand. Now it's impossible for me to cast my bait right into the rocks. Well, I can, but all I'm going to do is lose tackle. So the plan is to cast it out onto the clean sand, but as close to the rocks as I can. Now, having fished this mark for about 30 years now, I've often seen small shoals of bass actually moving along the borderline between the rocks and the sand, just moving across as the tide floods in. And I'll place my bait about 30 yards out from the rocks, and hopefully if any bass are moving along, they'll get attracted by the scent and move out to my bait. Now what I can't do, I can't fish too close to the rocks, because if I get a take, I'm going to have trouble working the fish
getting the fish up quick enough to work it over the rocks. So I'm about 20-30 yards out, gives me enough room to get a hooked fish up and over the rocks. And when I get myself set up down there and set up, I'll have a look at the tackle I'm using, and in particular today the rig I'm going to be using, which is going to help me if I do get a hook a fish to play it over these rocks here. The tackle I've got with me today, I've got two bass rods, one 12 foot, one 11 foot, 1 to 4 ounce bass rods, and they're loaded with 6,500 C multipliers. But more importantly today is the rig that I'm using, because as I said earlier, what I'm going to be doing is casting out across here onto clean sand. But if I get a hooked fish, I've got to work it across a very, very rocky area here. And the rig I'm using, which is ideal for that, is what is known as a pulley rig. Now there's plenty of very good videos or websites out there that explain how to tie a pulley rig, so I'm not going to go into that and try and better those. But basically how the pulley rig works, because it's on a pulley system with the lead one end and your baited hooks the other, if you get a hooked fish, the fish is going to be heavier than the lead. And the idea is that the weight of the fish will pull the lead up high on the pulley, so you've got the lead held high with the fish down on the end, hooked down on the end. And when you're playing the fish over the rocks, what it does, it keeps that lead high. Rather than the lead keep dropping down like that, if the lead was at the bottom, and let's say you've got a paternoster with the lead at the bottom and the snood just fixed coming out there, the lead is going to be constantly dropping down into the rocks. But because of the weight of the fighting fish is going to hold the lead up high, I've got much more chance of working the fish over these rocks without getting snagged. I mean, of course I still do stand a chance of getting snagged if it's a good fish and it dives down into the rocks, but I've got more chance with this rig. So that's the rig, it's exactly the same on both rods. It's a pulley rig. I'm using a pennel pulley rig with the two hooks, and I'll explain why later when I show you about the bait I'm using and the baiting up. I've got two baits with me today. I've got some lovely ragworm, fresh ragworm there, and also some razor clam, some frozen razor clam. And what I intend to do is mix it up a bit. I'll probably fish one rod with just ragworm and maybe the other rod with some ragworm and a little bit of razor clam, just to mix it up. But of course you can use any baits, lugworm, peeler crab, sand eel, all very, very good baits for bass. But that's what I've got some fresh lugworm and some frozen razor clam. Although I've got two rods today to start with, until the tide goes back, I'm only going to put one rod out. A little bit awkward, I just haven't got the room to fish two rods because I've got that rocking in the way there, and I just haven't got the room to space the two rods out. So we'll start with one rod, but when the tide goes back a bit and gets beyond this rock here and I can get beyond that rock, then I'll fish the two rods, and it'll be then that I'll mix the baits up. Just to show you the baiting up of this ragworm. Now when I go bait fishing for bass, I like to use big baits. Even small bass have got huge mouth, and the more scent you can get out there, the better. So I don't ever worry about fishing big baits. So we're just going to take our ragworm and then just hook it through the head there, and then just thread it right the way through the centre of the worm. Maybe just leave a little bit of the tail section there wriggling. Up over the knot, another ragworm, exactly the same. And these ragworm are not actually that big. And sometimes you can get, as I'm sure many of you know, some ragworm are absolutely huge. And then another one, so we're going to have a nice big bait. I brought plenty of bait with me for the session. So I've got 3 reasonable size ragworm on there. I mean, you could actually put more on, but later on when I fish the 2 rods, I'm actually going to tip the bottom hook with razor clam. So just going to push that down to make sure it's nice and nicely on the bottom hook there. And then with the pennel hook, just bring the pennel hook down and wrap it round the line about 3 times, and then just nick it through the end of the top ragworm there. And then we got a nice bait there. And the idea of the pennel rig is that apart from double hooking capability, it helps to keep the bait nicely in position rather than it all slipping down and bunching up on the bottom hook there. The hooks I'm using, I've got, the bottom hook is a 5.0 Varavas big mouth hook, and the top hook is a 4.0 Varavas pennel hook. Okay, the bait's out in the water now, so all we've got to do now is sit back and be patient, and hopefully there's 1 or 2 fish around. It's the ebb tide. I'm going to fish down to low water and then fish 3 hours up, so I'm going to have a good long session today. And one thing I think I ought to speak about, for those of you that are fairly new to rock fishing, is safety. Now later on, when the tide goes back, the whole of the session is going to mean clambering over rocks. You can't really see them now, but some of the rocks are really, really slippery. And what I do is I've got some boots with me that have got non-slip soles. Well, that's really important. But even so, the main thing is you've got to be really, really careful of what rocks you step on. Most of the rocks have got a fair bit of grip when they're dry, but of course when they're wet it's a little bit different. But some of the rocks, especially the shiny ones with a bit of green on them, a bit of weed, can be like stepping on an ice screen. And I know from experience, about 5 years ago, I was going down to a mark, just got to the point where I was just going to step onto a ledge where I was going to do my fishing, and slipped and fractured an ankle. Fortunately, on that occasion, I had someone with me, but it was really, really difficult getting back. I had to go back up on my hands and knees, and ended up 8 weeks in plasters, so I can assure you it's no joke. Now, years ago when I was a lot younger, I used to skip across these rocks, but now I'm getting on a bit, and having had that accident, I'm a lot more cautious and take my time. Well, the tide's gone back far enough now for me to have a bit more room. I've been able to move a little bit closer to the water, and I've got 2 rods out now, so hopefully that will double my chances of picking up a fish.
Unfortunately, on this occasion that did not happen, and it was like fishing the Dead Sea. But that's shore fishing. It's a big sea, and from the shore you are limited to fishing a tiny area, and if the fish do not pass your way feeding, then you blank. However, confidence built up over the years tells me that this mark and method will produce. So I brought some more bait from my local tackle shop and headed back on another occasion to try again.
Okay, I'm back out of the mark, and basically the tactics are going to be exactly the same as last time, the only difference being I've got a slightly different bait. I've got my razor clam with me again, but I've also got some sand eel rather than the worms. But both are great baits for bass. But when it comes to baiting up the sand eel, the razor clam, what I like to do is to cut a decent section of razor clam meat and first bind it with bait elastic. And because razor clam is such a soft bait, by binding it with bait elastic first to make a sausage, it makes it much easier to put on the hook. So we're going to do that first, just bind a piece with the bait elastic to make the sausage, and then we'll have a look at actually putting it on the hook. Once I've made my sausage of razor clam, putting it on the hook is very easy, and it's exactly the same as if you were fishing with worms. You can just simply thread the hook right through the center of the clam meat so it pops out the other end. And then what I like to do is bind it a little bit more, just secure it a bit more to the hook with more elastic. And got the two hooks on again, the pennel rig, and just like with the worms, bring the pennel hook down to the end and wrap it around the line about 3 times, and then nick it through the end of the meat. And nice fat chunk of razor clam there that's going to put out loads of scent in the water. The one great thing about razor clam, it does give out plenty of scent, so much so that when you've been using it, it takes quite a while to wash that scent out of the smell of the razor clam from your fingers. When it comes to baiting up the sand eel, these sand eel, what they call large, what the dealers call large, they're about, I suppose, about 5-6 inches, which I find is the ideal size when you're fishing sand eel for bass. A couple of ways you can bait them up. You can either bait them up whole like this, which is what I'm going to do in a moment, or chop the head off and the tail off and bait just the body up, which maybe we'll have a look at later. But when I bait it whole, what I do is put the hook, and again this is a 5/0 hook, through the mouth and out through the gills, through the gill cover, the gap in the gill cover there, and then it's going to come through the belly, but I want it to sit correctly like that. So I just push the eye of the hook to the edge of the mouth there, so I can judge where to put the hook through the belly, and it's about there, so that it will sit nicely through the belly and out the other side, so the hook and the sand eel sits nice and straight. And then finish it off by securing it to the hook with, once again, bait elastic. And putting a bit of bait elastic on will also, apart from keeping it on the hook, will also squeeze some of those lovely juices out. And there we have a nice sand eel with its juices oozing out, sitting nice and straight there on the hook. Tip I picked up from a viewer of the videos who lives in the States, in the US, and that is about how to keep your catch fresh. And it was after I'd done the video about how to keep your catch fresh on a kayak and the various ways you can do it, and the viewer put a comment in and mentioned how he keeps his catch fresh, and that is by using what we call a Hessian sack. Out in the States they call it burlap, a burlap sack. And usually when I come shore fishing, I bring this fish bag with me and pack it with a few blocks of ice. Now of course that adds weight, and when you're clambering across rocks and over cliff tops, the least weight you've got to carry the better. So I got myself one of these Hessian sacks, and basically how it works, you wet it, and as the water evaporates and dries, it cools. and I believe the term is, they call it evaporative cooling. And the last session I had here, although I didn't catch any fish, I tried it, wet it, and kept my bait in it, my worms, my box of worms. And when you put your hand in it, it does actually feel really, really cool, even when the sun's shining on it. So it's a great idea that I'm going to try out. So if I do happen to catch a fish that I feel is big enough for me to take, then I'll use this to keep it cool rather than the fish bag and ice. So a great idea. So many thanks for that comment and passing that information on from the viewer from California. It's taken a long time, but finally I'm into a fish. Hopefully it's a bass, and I don't quite know the size of it, but now this is where the problem starts. I need to maneuver it over and around these rocks here. Well, it is a bass. Yeah. Hopefully you can. It's not a very big bass, but at least it's a bass. Yeah, it's only a small bass, but never mind. Yeah. Small little bass, but still a bass. In fact, what I'm going to do with this one is unhook it straight away here and get it straight back. But we'll have a quick look at it first. Yeah, lovely little bass. And but we're about an hour and a half into the flooding tide now, and on evening tide. But even though it's a small bass, it's really pleasing to at least catch one, particularly from the shore, as it's not easy, and it's taken a huge effort just to get this little bass. But we still got about an hour and a half fishing time left, so I'll get this one back and get the bait back out, and hopefully we'll pick up a better one before the end of the session. Yeah, and that's gone back fine. So that's great. Just come to the end of my session now, and it's certainly a fantastic evening to end on. Just seeing the sun going down over the hill there. Just the one small bass, unfortunately, but that's the way shore fishing goes. You can come out, spend hours for nothing, or come out just for a small fish, and then another day you can come out adopting exactly the same methods and have a really good session with some decent fish. Still plenty of fishing time left, but with the fading light I've got to get myself packed up and ready before the light completely goes. We've got to clamber up this cliff face here and back over the top, back to the car and home. So although only the very small bass, pleasing to at least catch something, although it was a huge effort just for one small fish. But I'll be coming back for many more sessions off of here in the autumn, adopting the same methods, and no doubt, as in the past, I'll end up with a few decent fish. So once again, I hope you found that useful, and many thanks for watching.